Good morning, everyone, and welcome. The topic of today's online event is Beyond Waste, the role of agricultural residuals in the bioeconomy. My name is Brandy Yanchik, and I'm an independent journalist and documentary filmmaker who is based in Edmonton, Alberta, which is in Treaty 6 territory. I'd like to acknowledge the diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footprints have marked this territory for centuries, such as the Nehayao, Cree, Dene, Anishinaabe, Saulteaux, Nakota Ishka, Nakota Sioux, the Sitapi, Blackfoot peoples. I also acknowledge this as the Métis homeland and the home of one of the largest communities of Inuit south of the 60th parallel. Before I introduce today's panelists, a couple of quick housekeeping items. If you're having difficulties hearing the webinar at any time today, or you're experiencing an unreliable internet signal, you can always use the call-in number included in your webinar registration email, or by clicking the arrow next to the microphone icon and pressing switch to phone audio. There is a box labeled Q&A. This is where you can pose your questions to the panelists. If you see a question in the Q&A box that you think is important to ask, you can also click the thumbs up icon on the question to move it to the front of the queue. We will also have a couple of poll questions for you. Today's event will consist of the presentations by our panelists, followed by some questions after each presentation. We will then have a panel discussion around the topic. Please be aware that this event is being recorded. The recording will be uploaded to YouTube, and you will receive the link in an email along with the post-event survey. We will be taking clips from the video and posting these on social media. We do hope that today's event promotes more discussion with a broad diversity of participants. Today, I am joined by three distinguished speakers for this discussion. Kendra Donnelly is the managing partner and CFO at Rimrock Cattle Company Limited in High River, Alberta. Jeff Passmore is the CEO of the Passmore Group Incorporated and founder of Scaling Up Bioeconomy Conferences in Ottawa, Ontario. Dr. Davide Viaggi is a full professor in agricultural economics and rural appraisal at the University of Bologna in Italy. Welcome. Before we begin, we have a poll question for the audience. What agricultural residuals from both crop and livestock production could contribute to a more circular and resource-efficient bioeconomy? A, stalks, leaves, and parts of plants left over after harvesting. B, waste materials from processing of fruits and vegetables. C, organic waste produced by livestock. Or D, all of the above. You have 30 seconds to answer the poll, after which we will display the results. Okay, we have our answers. Okay, 0% of participants identified stalks, leaves, and parts of plants left over after harvesting as important. 4% of participants said waste materials from processing of fruits and vegetables. 0% of participants said organic waste produced by livestock. Aha! And 96% of participants said all of the above. And the answer to the Zoom poll is all of the above. Well done. Now I will briefly introduce the topic before inviting our distinguished speakers. What does it mean when we speak of the industrial bioeconomy? The definition that we'd like to introduce today is that it means using biological resources like trees, crops, grasses, organic wastes, algae, and waste to produce bioenergy, renewable fuels, and biochemicals for the creation of innovative bioproducts and biomaterials. The idea of the bioeconomy fits within an approach that looks at the transition away from a linear economy towards a circular economy. It is linked to a broader societal shift from an economy characterized by use and throw away to an economy where resources are reused and we extract as much value out of those resources as possible. I will now invite Kendra Donnelly to start the discussion. As you listen to her presentation, can you please think of some questions that you'd like to ask her and put them in the Q&A box? In your question, please also tell us your name and a bit about yourself, such as your location and your profession.
Hello, everyone. Super happy to be here. I'm just going to share my screen and my presentation. So give me 1 second. Okay, I think you can see the screen now. So yes, thank you very much to the Simpson Center and the School of Public Policy for hosting these events to have some really great conversation around this topic. So I'm Kendra Donnelly, and my family and I run operations in both Acme and in High River. I went to school and worked off farm for 10 years, and a bit of entrepreneurial side of me wanted to go home, invest in the business, and see where I could add value. So since my husband and I made that leap, we have grown our operation from one feed yard of 16,000 head to now 3 feed yards across Alberta, both 2 in Acme and 1 in High River, feeding around 70,000 head. So my brother-in-law, Evan Hagedis, my father, Doug Price, and I, and my husband operate these businesses, and we're currently constructing a feedlot in Nebraska for 150,000 head. So we love feeding cattle, and we love we love Alberta and investing in Alberta and in Canada, and we see an opportunity to also expand into the US. So why as part of my CFO role, I look into the typical CFO roles that I would play across our family businesses, but I also look at the sustainability side of our operation. And quite a few years ago now, we saw an opportunity to utilize our manure and add value to our manure. So as part of that vision, we decided to partner with a company called Tidewater Renewables, who are headquartered in Calgary, Alberta, and are a leader in the energy transition and production of low carbon fuels. Rimrock, my family, as I described, is an Alberta-based multi-generation farming family who have been leaders in agriculture and agri-food for over 40 years. So that partnership brought a team together that brings such depth and knowledge and experience across multiple sectors. And we felt that that put this partnership in a good position to be successful. So now that formed what we call Rimrock Renewables. And Rimrock Renewables strives to be a leader in sustainable food and energy solutions by reducing waste, producing energy, and decreasing emissions. So I'm going to describe now how we're going to accomplish that. Obviously, to Rimrock Renewables and to our family, it's really important for us to look at how we can be sustainable. And I think about that in a lot of different aspects. A lot of different pillars go towards being sustainable. Of course, it's an environment and how we can improve the environment. It's also the social aspect, where how can we improve lives or improve how we have an impact within our communities. And then, of course, the economic impact, making the business sustainable, but also the community we live in sustainable. So we feel that Rimrock Renewables creates value that complements existing operations like ourselves, and industry expertise to try and find ways to add value to our waste products. So I just want to highlight why this is important for Canada and the Alberta economy, is that 2/3 of the cattle are finished in Alberta that are in Canada. And we have a majority of the cattle processing facilities, meaning we have a lot of manure material, organic material that we can add value to produce renewable fuels. So I'm going to talk about our current practice across industry. So our current practice in industry is to feed cattle. Those cattle are housed on what we call clay-based or soil-based pen floor linings. They produce manure, obviously, and they walk around that pen, the cattle do. And they puncture the pen floor lining, which then mixes the clay and dirt with the manure. So it contaminates the manure. Whenever you have non-organic material with an organic material like manure, it was very difficult to separate that and add value to that manure. So that contamination is a problem if we want to try and find a different avenue to add value to manure. And then, of course, we spread that manure on the land, and we are limited to spread that land, typically manure on the land, typically only 2 times a year. So that means there's some stockpiling that occurs. Um, and then, of course, for organic food, as probably many people know, organic food goes to landfills. There are some that go to compost, but we feel there's an opportunity to mix that in with the manure through biodigestion. So what we did different, our family and I, is we placed rolled compacted concrete across our pen floor lining. So what that did, and so it was over 200 football fields of concrete we placed across our feedlots. So a significant amount of concrete. And what that did is it gave more comfort for the animals and it improved their performance. So we actually seen an improvement in enteric methane emissions because of that. But also it kept the manure homogeneous, meaning there was no longer that contamination from the clay and dirt. And the research that has been done by the Alberta government and other private industry is that we can see up to 30 to 40% of contamination of soil, dirt, and clay in the manure unless we have this concrete that they're housed on. So because we invested significantly in this concrete, now we had an opportunity to try and upgrade that manure since it's now homogeneous. It's perfect for biodigestion. So here is our proposed biodigester site that we're currently in final design. And you can see on the very far left corner is the feedlot operation. And the feedlot operation is so the biodigester is co-located to the feedlot. So you can see there's a road that comes from the feedlot to the biodigester. We have an internal road. So every day of the year now, we would be able to scrape our pens, and now we have a destination for that manure. When, if you remember current practice, we have to stockpile and then spread on the land 2 times per year. Now we can scrape every single day and deliver that manure to a biodigester. I won't go in detail of what all the items within this diagram is, but you can see the digesters there. There's 6 digesters. As soon as the manure is delivered to the site, it goes into those digesters along with some organic material. And by mixing those 2 materials together, produces a significant amount of biogas, which is then upgraded to renewable natural gas. So this is just a different flow diagram showing what the current practice flow diagram versus now. This is the new, in my opinion, the next generation of feedlot production is to have co-located biodigesters where we change our practices and take what was used to be kind of a liability to the feedlot being the manure. Now it's a very valuable product because we're adding value to it through anaerobic digestion, where we pull off biogas from the manure and upgrade that to renewable natural gas, where we inject that gas into the ATCO pipeline that runs next to our site, which would heat around 4,000 homes using renewable natural gas rather than fossil fuel gas. And then the next product is digestate. So that digestate is a nutrient dense product, just like manure is, but it's been processed. So it's a stable product. It has very minimal odor, and it's perfect fertilizer still for the cropland. And that's the piece that I'm probably most passionate about because I see the most opportunity. Renewable natural gas has been a common practice, and anaerobic digestion has been a common practice, where what's unique about the digestate is it has all the NPK and that organic material, that fibrous material that is such a good soil amendment for the cropland. So it's an organic material that we can still utilize for fertilization. So we never lose that circular system that we see through manure. We never lose that because the nutrients are still there. So we actually have two styles of digestate. We have a solid fraction digestate that we can truck and spread on land and incorporate it into the soil, just like we do manure, but less odorous. And then on the liquid digestate, we can incorporate the liquid in the land, just like you would a liquid form of nutrients. So very excited about that piece because we keep that circular system that we like to see in agriculture. So biodigestion is nothing new. It's been in practice co-located on farms across Europe and quite a few in Canada, more Eastern Canada on dairy operations. So it's a common practice, it's a common technology. What's unique in our situation is because the way feedlots have been built, where the pen floor lining is clay, there hasn't been successful deployment of a beef feedlot co-located biodigester. But it's very common as long as the livestock are housed on concrete, where you see this process happen, upgrading manure through biodigestion across globally. So I really feel that now that we've found a solution on how we house our cattle and that we see a better animal welfare and performance, it now gives us this leap into a renewable fuel and a great organic fertilizer material that we're upcycling now our what was once waste manure. So lessons learned and the opportunity and challenge. So I would say that this is new. Biodigestion in Alberta especially is new. You see 200 to 300 biodigesters co-located on farms in Ontario and Quebec and other provinces out east. But for Western Canada, it's a fairly new kind of industry, I suppose. So I think education and informing our communities on how important it is to look for value add on waste materials such as manure and the benefits that that brings, such as odor reduction, is really important. Obviously, a regulatory pathway is always important. Recognizing that something new takes some time to build that regulatory pathway, but regulatory certainty, where there's significant investment dollars at risk here, we need to make sure we have a clear pathway for these investments. And then infrastructure, where the difficult part in infrastructure is access to market for your energy, renewable energy. So we just happen to be lucky to have a natural gas pipeline, a few meters away from our operation to inject our products so it can get to market, so we can be economically sustainable. That's not always the case for farms. It's typically rural Alberta or rural Canada, and so that access to market might not be there. So we might have to rethink infrastructure. And then, of course, competitiveness. Different policies globally, especially in the US with the Inflation Reduction Act, has made investment go elsewhere. So we just have to make sure we build policy if we want to see these projects move forward that are competitive against other jurisdictions, because we're both sides of the border, and you can really notice how policy can make an impact on where we invest our dollars. So that's my presentation. So I will just stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Kendra. I thought that was fascinating. And actually, the first question is from me. I'm an avid vegetable gardener, and I was just curious, when you're talking about this concrete and the manure, is it difficult to collect the manure in the winter?
Oh, so a very interesting question. So in 2019, we started to place this roll compacted concrete. And so obviously something new, you start to learn how to best manage your manure. We were in the mindset, oh, you can only scrape your pens 2 times a year because that's what we always did, right? But we found that with roll compacted concrete, our equipment can get into the pens because there's not that mud, right? There's no mud effect anymore. So we don't get stuck anymore. The cattle also are more comfortable because they don't get stuck anymore. So it's a really cool kind of change in the way we manage manure because we can get into the pen every single day of year. I think in the last few years, we've only missed about 2 weeks of scraping up the pens of weather. So it's always kind of available for us to scrape and deliver to a biodigester, and that's important because a biodigester always has to be fed. It's a kind of like a rumen, right? It needs to be fed every single day. So we make sure we feed that biodigester every day.
Fascinating. Okay, well, thank you for sharing your answer to my question that popped into my mind. And I have another one for you. When did you first come up with the idea of adding a biodigester to the operations at Rim Rock Feeders? When did you first come up with that idea?
Yeah, so I think, as we started to deploy this roll compacted concrete in 2019, so keep in mind, we did this concrete for reasons for the health of the animals. And it just was serendipity that, oh, like now we have this product that actually we can add value to. So our decision to place concrete wasn't for biodigestion, it was for the cattle and the welfare of the animals. So, but as we kind of figured this out, so it was around 2020 that we said, holy man, we have a huge opportunity. We have a significant amount of organic material that we control. We should be able to invest in co-locate a biodigester to our site to upgrade that manure for value. We also saw across North America biodigesters start to get built, and some were built but shut down for a period of time, and they ramped them back up in 2019. And that was for policy and regulatory changes, policy changes, where renewable fuels was getting a premium price, which made it very economical now to run these biodigesters.
Okay, I have a question for you here. What is the main issue with organic matter mixed with non-organic matter, like clay? Is it no longer possible to separate and won't digest dead spots for bacteria, or is the mixed material just no longer economically feasible to use?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So if you think about the capital that it requires for a biodigester, you need to run that biodigester in the most efficient way. So if 30% of the material in that biodigester is non-organic, you're not producing biogas from that product, meaning your 30% reduction in your biogas potential, meaning it's no longer economical. So and then also the buildup of grit within the biodigester tank itself starts to happen because it settles on the ground, and you're then cleaning that biodigester way more frequently than you should be. So it's those two reasons that you really need this homogeneous feedstock, and that's for agriculture waste, but also organic food waste. I think people think when they, throw their material in a bin or something that it's easily incorporated into like a biodigester. But there's so many contaminants that we run into within that space that there are depackagers and ways to separate that contaminated material, but it's expensive equipment. So I think that area is innovating, and maybe we'll see that happen on the feedlot side too, where we don't have to deploy all this concrete. That there's other ways to separate the sand and grit, but what I've learned so far is pretty difficult.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Kendra, for your presentation. It's fascinating, and I'm sure people's minds are now racing to ask you more questions. So, as we continue, please continue to put your questions in the chat. Don't forget to include your name and location, because we love to actually know a little bit about who's asking these questions. And we're going to continue to take more audience questions at the end. Thank you very much, Kendra. So before we go to our next speaker, we're going to do another quick poll question. And you're going to have 30 seconds to answer this poll. The question is, how many countries have a bioeconomy strategy, a national policy focused on leveraging its biological resources, innovation, and sustainable practices to drive economic growth? A, less than 5, B, more than 10, C, more than 50. You have 30 seconds. Okay, we have the results. 56% said less than 5, 41% said more than 10, and 4% said more than 50. And the answer to the Zoom poll is, according to the Canadian Biomass magazine, there are 60 countries in the world that have national bioeconomy strategies, but Canada is not among them. So now I'm going to invite Jeff Passmore to share his presentation and explain these approaches in more detail. Please remember to type your questions in the Q&A box and let us know your name and a bit about yourself, such as your location and your profession. Thank you, Jeff.
Great. Well, thank you for the introduction, Brandy, and thanks to the Simpson Center and the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary for the invitation. I want to start by just saying that Kendra's presentation was a great precursor to what I'm going to say, because her mention of the need for regulatory certainty, her mention of the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, her mention of the need for education in Alberta about biodigesters, and of course, renewable natural gas. I mean, all of these things are part of what I'm going to be talking about in terms of replacing hydrocarbons with carbohydrates. So thanks for that segue, Kendra. You can go to the next slide, please. So yes, my thesis here with respect to the industrial bioeconomy is that Canada is ill-prepared for the coming biorevolution. And there are about 60 countries that have national bioeconomy strategies, almost every country in Europe, the US, China, India, Costa Rica. The list goes on, we'll talk about that. And really with 348 million hectares of forest land and 60 million hectares of ag land, and all kinds of municipalities that don't know what to do with their organic waste or no longer allow it to be landfilled, the fact that we don't have a national strategy is counterintuitive. Next slide. So there's the stuff that we know about. Everybody knows about, ethanol. Ethanol's in all gasoline across Canada, blended at 10%, maybe some exceptions in Atlantic Canada, but we know about renewable fuels. We know about using bioenergy for heat and electricity. But the exciting stuff, as far as I'm concerned, are the biochemicals for a whole host of producing products and materials, paints, plastics, diapers, as I say there on the slide, personal care products. If you go to the U.S. Department of Agriculture BioPreferred program, and you can just Google U.S. Department of Agriculture BioPreferred, there's a catalog that pops up with some 16,000 items that are registered as minimum 3% biomass based. And so the revolution is underway, and Canada needs to be thinking about making those types of materials so that we end up exporting them, not importing them. Next slide. Here we have what's the size of the prize? Well, according to the McKinsey study that was published in May of 2020, the direct economic impact, and with emphasis on direct, is about 4 trillion a year. That includes biopharma. So of course, today we're not talking about biopharma, we're talking about the industrial bioeconomy, but more than half of the 4, in other words, 2 trillion, is outside biopharma, outside human health, in domains such as agriculture and food, consumer products, materials, and energy production. So that's what we're talking about in the industrial bioeconomy. Next slide. And how is it happening? Well, it's happening because of biology. The future is really biology, and not only breakthroughs in the science of biology, but that taken together with advances in computing and data analytics, machine learning, AI, that sort of stuff. So biology is increasingly being used to create novel materials that have unique qualities and can be produced in ways that emit significantly less carbon. And so all those materials that I was talking about before, those 16,000 items in the US BioPreferred program, are replacing hydrocarbons with carbohydrates. In other words, replacing a barrel of oil with biomass, trees, crops, grasses, and so on. Next slide. So what does Foresight say? Well, Foresight say that Canada has a unique opportunity. Forestry, pulp and paper, and agriculture, and the circular bioeconomy could be 7.7 trillion opportunity by 2030, of which 240 billion in Canada alone. So I mean, they're way more ambitious even than the McKinsey study. McKinsey talked about 2 trillion a year. This, of course, doesn't mention whether this is a total or per year, but 2 trillion a year, is that a big number? Yes, it's the size of the Canadian GDP. So, my point would be, why can't Canada capture 10% of that market and turn it into a $200 billion a year annual opportunity for Canada? Next slide. And there you go. Where is all this biomass? Well, it's interesting that Saskatchewan and Alberta, and if you go to the next slide, you'll see that the same is true of forestry. 60% of Alberta is covered in forest, and more than 50% of Saskatchewan is covered in forest. And then all that agriculture land, our what do they call it? The agriculture basin, the food basin for Canada is in Western Canada. So there's a huge opportunity here, given the number of carbohydrates that are produced. Next slide. And of course, look at the export opportunities. I mean, we've got an integrated North American rail system, and so there's a huge opportunity to export these products and materials to a world that's hungry for low carbon, sustainably developed materials. And next slide. So the industrial bioeconomy dovetails nicely into the federal government's policy agenda, and indeed many of the provincial government's agenda, and even municipal government's agendas for job creation and industrial development and infrastructure. Kendra spoke about infrastructure upgrades. And then, of course, meeting our Paris obligations, the climate goals, and made in Canada, and improved health and security. All the emissions associated with fossil fuels could disappear if we got into using more on the biomass side. So, and then, of course, there's 200 or more First Nations communities that need to get off diesel. Why are we flying in diesel fuel for, heating and energy for these communities when, in fact, they're surrounded by forests and could be putting in biomass-based boilers? Next slide. So now we have to be fair here. The Canadian Council of Forest Ministers, it did come out with a forest bioeconomy framework in 2017, and it renewed it in 2022. I've never been quite sure what the difference is between a framework and a strategy, but they identified a number of challenges and suggested some actions. And so even though this is the Canadian Council of Forest Ministers, it's very applicable also to agriculture. Next slide. So some of the challenges, it said access to focus funding for demonstration projects. And the action there would be continue to support government procurement of bioproducts. Well, this is, of course, my point, which is the US has a biopreferred program. Why doesn't Canada have one? This would create an incredible amount of market pull for the bioeconomy because under the rules of the US program, federal departments are obliged to procure independently certified bio-based products and materials. So Canada should have a similar one and create that kind of market pull. Next slide. Another one of the challenges they identified, and Kendra referred to this, was the regulatory and policy alignment. And the action would be that, support improved communication and seek complementarity across support programs at all levels of government. Well, that would be what a national strategy would accomplish. And the same thing with respect to federal, provincial, and territorial tables to ensure coordination across Canada. We don't need a hodgepodge of rules and regulations different in every province. And that's, again, a national strategy would speak to that. Next slide. So are we ill prepared? Well, I'll let the audience decide. I have a quote here from the White House, September 2022, an executive order that said it is the policy of my administration to coordinate a whole of government approach to advance biotechnology and biomanufacturing. And this would maintain the United States technological leadership and economic competitiveness. He went on to say that it is the policy of my administration to boost sustainable biomass production and create climate-smart incentives for American agriculture producers and forest landowners. So that was the executive order, and it gave the federal departments 180 days, 6 months to respond, which is unheard of in Canada, that the federal government would give the bureaucrats, 6 months. And guess what happened in the US? Next slide. So 6 months later, this is what came out. The departmental response to the president's executive order called Bold Goals for US Biotechnology and Biomanufacturing, March of 2023, so just a year ago. And the next slide, I just have one quote from that, which is that the world is on the cusp of an industrial revolution fueled by biotechnology and biomanufacturing. And so, and then the last part there, where through biomanufacturing, sustainable biomass across the United States can be converted into new products, provide an alternative to petroleum-based production for chemicals, medicines, fuels, materials, and more. So that's what we're talking about, the extent of the opportunity here of biomass to provide an alternative to petroleum-based products and materials. Next slide. Is Canada competing? Well, here's what our trade partners are doing with respect to national bioeconomy strategies. The US had its first one in 2012, but it's been updated with this White House order that I just referred to in the previous slide. The European Commission had their strategies in 2012 and updated it in 2018. And then, of course, not just within the EU, but not just the EU and the European Commission, rather, but individual countries within. And I list a bunch of them there, from Austria to Spain, and then, of course, the United Kingdom, and then other countries, Kenya, Tanzania, Mexico. You'll see China had its first in 2012 and updated it in 2022, and so on down the list. Next slide. What are the implications for Canada in the absence of a national focus? Well, Canada will import bio-based products and export jobs. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, there's an opportunity here for a $200 billion a year domestic industry. So talk about wealth creation. And this is my favorite quote out of the McKinsey Global Institute. And this harkens back to what Kendra said in Alberta about Albertans needing to be better educated with respect to biodigesters. Well, McKinsey said that Canadian stakeholders and contributors need to inform themselves about the biorevolution. Innovators, businesses, governments, and citizens need to become bioliterate. And I think that's one of the challenges in Canada, is that we have not focused on this. The government's definition of clean tech is admirable, but far too narrow: wind, solar, electric vehicles, and hydrogen. And we are not literate when it comes to the bioeconomy. Next slide. So the future's biology. We have enormous bioresources, and this bioeconomy would help us meet our Paris obligations. But of course, transitioning away from hydrocarbons to an economy based on biology and carbohydrates will encounter challenges, but they shouldn't be the result of political ignorance or myopia. Policy risk must not create market uncertainty and the risk of stranded assets, and that's kind of, again, harkening back to what Kendra was referring to in terms of regulatory certainty. So we need a national bioeconomy strategy led jointly by Natural Resources Canada, Innovation, Science and Economic Development, and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. And if we're going to continue to stand on the sidelines, then we're going to be forced to consume all these products because people want them. When I go to the grocery store and I can buy laundry detergent with a sticker on it from the US Department of Agriculture saying that this product is certified biomass based, I buy that laundry detergent. So we're going to end up importing all those products and exporting the job. So think vaccines. That's what happened during the pandemic. We didn't make any vaccines domestically. Next slide. You want to learn more? This is the annual conference on the industrial bioeconomy that takes place every November in Ottawa. So there's the website there, scalingupconference.ca. And the reason we have it in Ottawa is because we try to get the federal public servants more bioliterate. And we usually have about 60 of the audience of 220 are federal public servants from different departments. And it's a great opportunity for networking with them. I think that's the next slide. I think that's the last slide. Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Jeff. There's lots to think about and lots of opportunities, it looks like, for Canada. We do have a question from Joel from the audience, and he writes, I was under the impression that Canada does, in fact, have a bioeconomy strategy. And he cites Bin Canada, which is a nonprofit based in Ontario, and an article from 2019 with the title, Government Invests in Canada's First National Bioeconomy Strategy to Help Grow a Clean Economy. Do you want to comment on that, Jeff, please?
Are you referring to BIC, B-I-C, BIC Canada? You said BIN, I'm not sure. Bioindustrial Innovation Canada did come out with a national strategy 3 or 4 years. No, it's more than that now. It's pre-pandemic. And I was involved in the consultation process on that strategy. This is a strategy put together by Canadian citizens, industry, and the basically NGOs and so on. This is not a strategy that was put together by the federal government. The closest thing we have to a national strategy is the one I referred to earlier, which is the Forest Bioeconomy Framework.
Okay. So there is a relationship between BIC and BIN. That's what I was told here in my notes. So I have another question from you, from Janae from the UFA. Agriculture available biomass is considered product that is available for use in operations. The availability will be dependent based on seasonal variability. This challenges the available feedlot from agriculture. Has there been a historic, accurate inventory of available biomass from agriculture? Product is also beneficial to be left on crop to improve soil health. Has this been considered in the available biomass review?
Well, answering the last question first, yes, one does not want to remove all biomass from the land. And so, for example, I used to live in Saskatchewan, and I have friends there that still farm 10,000 acres, and we were talking to them about the removal of straw. They grow wheat, oats, barley, canola, and one would only take, if you wanted to have straw, for example, as a feedstock for a biorefinery, one would only take about 1/3 of that 10,000 acres and rotate which 1/3 you took it from every year. And we leave it up to the farmers to decide that. I wouldn't want to pretend that I'm, better at agriculture and farming than a guy that's actually doing the job. So if he's got 10,000 acres, in the case of this gentleman, he would contract to sell us his agricultural biomass from 1,500 to 2,000 acres, and then rotate it as to which 2,000 acres he took it off every year. As to an inventory, I have a feeling that the answer to that, to my knowledge, is no. There used to be, well, depends if a federal inventory, no, but a provincial inventory, I mean, Saskatchewan, for example, county by county, regional municipality by regional municipality, they know how much is growing in each area, and you can go into those areas. There are maps which show you, okay, so for example, you don't want to be drawing waste, so-called waste. We don't call it waste. Farmers don't like to call it waste because it adds value to the land. So, but you don't want to be hauling more than about 100 kilometers. And so you would go into one of the provincial government maps, see where all of that residue exists, and then contract with farmers that are within 100 kilometers of where you plan to locate your facility.
So Kendra, I'm wondering if you're interested in speaking on this question too, from Janae from the UFA. He was wondering about whether or not the product is also beneficial to be left on crop to improve soil health. Has this been considered in the available biomass review? And sorry, Janae is a she. Kendra?
No, really interesting question. So what's unique about, I don't have much crop knowledge, but what's interesting about the feedlot side is manure. Manure is our feedstock, right? And we don't lose the nutrients nor the fibrous material that creates that organic material on the soil when we do incorporate it. So we're just essentially putting a step in between, right? Where we're, instead of going manure straight to the land for fertilization and organic material, we are putting a biodigester in between, and that's not lost. Digestate goes on the land instead. So what's unique about the manure concept, it is a waste that we're upgrading, but we never lose the nutrients. What else is unique in that is local farmers in our area might have a material such as straw that actually works really good for bedding our cattle and produces a lot of biogas in the biodigester. So we take it one step further, where we're putting those materials through the feedlot, which breaks it down enough that then it produces a really good biogas once it hits the biodigester. So I feel like a feedlot model, partnering with farmers on what is possible in this bioeconomy, is really circular and really brings all those opportunities forward.
Excellent. Thank you so
Just
much,
one
Kendra, for,
observation.
oh, sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to, in order to make the person who asked this question feel comfortable, all of this stuff has to be done sustainably, and it's up to the growers to decide what is sustainable. We don't want to go into a community and say, well, we're taking your straw. Like, I mean, first of all, they wouldn't sell it to us. So it has to be left up to the growers to decide how much material they remove and how much they leave on the land. And we don't, for example, if you look at Saskatchewan and Alberta, the southern part is clay. Then you get into the brown soils, and then you get into the black soils. And it's the black soils that have the massive material that one would remove. You wouldn't remove hardly anything from the clay soil regions and even from the brown soil regions. The black soil regions are rich in organic matter, and those are the farmers that are willing to rotate the removal of some straw, annually from different fields. I mean, when I grew up in Saskatchewan, people used to light their fields on fire. That's how they got rid of the straw. But now, first of all, that's forbidden. Secondly, hopefully, most farmers are doing no-till agriculture, because every time you till it, you're releasing carbon. So you want to do no-till agriculture. So the question is what to do with that material. And in some cases, they bale it and use it for animal bedding. In some cases, they'll ship it off to Kendra, but that would be fantastic. And in other cases, they could provide it to a biorefinery. But you leave the stalks and stubble 3 or 4 inches above the ground. The stalks and stubble, you leave that in the ground. You don't remove that.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for all that information. In fact, I do no-till in my vegetable garden, and my tomatoes are awesome, and I use chicken poo, but that's a whole other discussion. We're going to move now to the poll question. You have 30 seconds to answer the poll, after which we will display the results. So the question for this poll question is, what challenges do you believe bioeconomy policies should address most urgently? A, environmental sustainability. B, financial stability of farm operations. Basically, it's about staying afloat or breaking even on the farm. Or C, technological innovation. Or D, food security. You have 30 seconds. Okay, thank you so much for sending in your answers. 12% believe that environmental sustainability should be top of mind when we design policies for the bioeconomy. 44% of participants think that we should prioritize the economic sustainability of agribusinesses. 16% of participants believe that technological innovation should be a focus for policies, and 28% of participants believe that food security should be the focus, the primary focus. And the answer to the Zoom poll is all of these answers are correct. And we're really glad to hear your opinions on what the policy focus should be for promoting the bioeconomy in Canada. I will now invite Davide Viaggi to share his presentation and explain these approaches in more detail. Please remember to type your questions in the Q&A box and let us know who you are and where you're writing from. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I trust you see my presentation correctly and you hear me.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much for inviting me to this online event. And actually, it's quite interesting to learn and to see what is happening on the other side of the Atlantic, apparently. My contribution will be on the same issues in a way, looking at a couple of cases, which is one, the consistency and the connection between bioeconomy strategy in Europe and the agricultural policies related to bioeconomy on the one hand, and then the other one on small case study related to biogas happening some years ago that can be actually some example to learn from for the development of this kind of strategies. I myself, I'm a professor in agricultural economics. I've been actually working a lot on the common agricultural policy, the main policy related to agriculture in the EU. I will tell something about this later on. But since many years, I'm now working also on bioeconomy issues, and recently, especially on bioeconomy training and education issues, by the way. Bioeconomy strategies, it was mentioned, is something not everywhere happening. Actually, in Europe, we have a bioeconomy strategy. The bioeconomy strategy in Europe is basically working on a definition that defines bioeconomies as a collection of sectors, and also connecting these sectors to, of course, bioeconomy, biological resources, which is the definitory feature, but also ecosystems and potential for innovation. Today, we have a main strategy in Europe, which is the European Green Deal. And actually, it is stated, or it is aimed at, that the bioeconomy would contribute to this. So you see many examples of things that fit into the bioeconomy. I will not list those, but I think you can guess from the figure what I mean. The story of the strategy is now already more than 10 years long. Actually, the first strategy was in 2012, after some years of discussion, and this strategy came a lot from Research and Innovation Directorate at the beginning. After some years, in 2018, we had an update strategy that especially reduced the focus from, let's say, biotechnologies and new technologies, and put it more on regional development and the ecological side of this. And when the Green Deal actually came, attention was really moved even much more on climate change and new ecological dimensions. Actually, we are now undergoing a new process of potential update of the strategy. There were council conclusions about the implementation of the strategy. There was a progress report already last year, and some of the issues that are quite evident in this latest process is an even growing attention to rural areas and connection with agriculture and forestry and aquaculture as well. Now, one of the big issues with strategies is that strategies, as they are of course showing the way to go, but there is no direct funding or direct regulation. Strategies are implemented through other policies or even other derived strategies. And this is the main issue of the connection between bioeconomy and agriculture in Europe, because money for agriculture doesn't come from the bioeconomy strategy, but it comes from the common agricultural policy. The common agricultural policy, for those that are not familiar with, is the agricultural policy of the European Union. And actually, agricultural regulation is delegated to the European Union, and then member states in Europe provide the implementation of the common policy. So Brussels is actually where the main decisions are taken on this topic. And agricultural policy accounts for about 1/3 of the current EU budget. So it's something very relevant. So the issue of coordination of these two things, bioeconomy strategies and common agricultural policy, at least for agriculture and rural areas, are really key. And the same applies for the other sectors, of course. Besides the EU strategies, as it was mentioned, member states have their own strategies, and of course, as you can imagine, strategies are different from one country to the other, depending on the different resource endowments and also well, strategies and path dependency probably on the bioeconomy. In Italy, we have a strategy since 2017, and we also managed to have already an implementation plan. And we are probably again looking at a revision of the strategy. In Italy, the strategy came a lot from bio-based industries and with a strong push from research. But in the end, it was also promoted by agri-food national clusters. So it's really a combination of different points of view. And initially, it basically ignored the agricultural sector, and then actually over time, the agricultural sector came in, and without getting into details, there is now quite a lot that relates to how agriculture and the food sector can contribute to the bioeconomy and the other way around. And especially there is attention to new bio-based supply chains on the one hand. There was a traditional attention to bioenergy. I will come to that later. And quite a lot about food waste, especially in a country that is well known and actually has a strong food industry. The issue of food waste and the opportunity to use them in a circular way is actually an important strategic item for both the bioeconomy and agricultural policies. Well, this is not to get into much detail, but one big issue that you have to deal with when you think at agriculture, farming, forestry, and the bioeconomy is that apparently different points of view see bioeconomy and agriculture having a different connection. When you read the EU bioeconomy documents, it looks like agriculture is fully within the bioeconomy. And the same applies for food. If you take the vision at country level, it's a bit as if there is an interconnection, but they are not really overlapping. When you look at the common agricultural policy, it's much more as if bioeconomy is something outside agriculture, or maybe they touch each other a little bit. And I think this is a big issue that is partly a common issue everywhere, where we have a problem with bioeconomy definition, and this reflects actually in having consistent understanding and consistent action towards producers and industry. And this is actually the main topic of the short example I will give now, which is connected on potential and difficulties in putting these things together at the level of an individual farm. My example comes from a dairy farm in the region here. Actually, it's a friend of mine working here close to Bologna in northern Italy. Beginning after 2000, there was already potential for support to biogas plants within the common agricultural policy, much before a bioeconomy strategy was actually produced. And this farmer engaged in building one of these plants. He got money from the rural development programs, something like 180,000 euro. And it also had facilitated access to a loan for basically the remaining cost of the plant. At that time, agricultural prices were quite low, and basically it was very easy to access waste because even a food company, they would pay you to collect and use their waste. And bioenergy prices were comparatively very high. So we did an exercise of evaluating the internal rate of return, and apparently it was estimated as something between 30 and 50%. Things started, and actually it was initially very successful, even if since the beginning, something that was not very clear before was that managing this kind of plant is much complex than expected. Is a living organism or a set of very complicated living organisms. So you cannot feed with everything you have. You have to keep some balances. You have to look carefully at what you do. But it was very successful because actually it was in the news. He had the queue of journalists in the courtyard. He also engaged in with a company selling biogas plants because apparently that was really a big business. Actually, some years later, something happened. Not only bioenergy prices became lower, it became more and more difficult to find the waste, and there was even a market for what was before considered as a waste. And in addition, they realized that there were conflicts with local norms on waste. He has to build new buildings. And in terms of profitability, that dropped dramatically. But even more, when people realized what was happening, they started with neighbors' conflicts, building up of local committees against biogas plants, and that was not only something local, it was all around the region. And yes, in addition, there was some issues also with the companies producing plants because it was not so easy to sell them as it was expected. Over time now, quite a lot of time has passed. Actually, biogas is much more accepted. There were up and downs in agricultural price that also make a difference a little bit. But anyway, it's not so profitable anymore, and there is quite now into thinking solutions to changing, for example, biomethane that was mentioned before, or even algae production or something similar. There was many lessons learned from this. First, the importance to build any way of local entrepreneurship and individual entrepreneurship is not just a matter of incentives and money, but also ensuring consistency of legal system. That's something that should be thought since the beginning. And also the need anyway to have very good expertise, otherwise this project failed. And it's important to build on people that actually have this expertise. Some concluding remarks, also to highlight something that I said already. Even if from outside it may be looked that we have wonderful strategies, actually we still have quite an issue in consistency between strategies and the actual policy in place, and I think this is quite common to different places and situations. Attention to waste and agricultural residues in the bioeconomies are always been high. Bioenergy was in a way the first item we started with, but actually now this item is evolving. Bio-based value chains, all the wonderful products that were mentioned before are actually one of the big things in perspective. In Europe, we have a strong attention to refinery concept. Let's use materials and before we get into energy, and we are moving towards circular bioeconomy and a systemic vision as an overall much more systemic and consistent attempt to deal with these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Davide, for sharing your presentation, and fascinating hearing about your friend's experience there as well. Our first question for you is, in what ways does CAP, Common Agricultural Policy in Europe, propose to adopt low-emission feeding strategies and improve manure management to enhance the sustainability of the livestock sector?
Yeah, there's different ways actually. Manure management has always been a part of CAP intervention, and since the 90s, actually, we had intervention to make storage and processing more environmental friendly. Actually, with opposite trends over time. At the beginning, we just tend to reduce nitrogen flow to the field. Now the problem is more reduce emission to the atmosphere or a combination of the two. So there were money for investing in the, oh, sorry. The CAP is implementing in very different ways in different countries. So you can have different solutions in different areas. Something that is now more in the attention is actually related to nutrition. And we have, in that case, I think it's more on innovation measures. I'm not aware of direct measures for improved nutrition, but I may miss something.
Okay, and we have another question here. Thank you for answering that one. Can you also tell us more about the shift in focus from biofuels and bioenergy to other bioproducts in the EU, please?
Yes, I think this is the actually big matter for the future. Um, the main concept is that there is the people realize that actually there is potentially much more than energy from bioproduction, and there are, I think, two different ways that are underway. One is the view of the big bio-based industry, and this is related to large-scale production of materials, for example, related to plastics and similar, but also on innovative materials of other kinds. The other way is more related, and is more related to agriculture, is actually the production of a variety of very small scale solutions, like, for example, small pharmaceutical things, small textile things. I think there is a lot happening with a problem, which is probably the fact that this is split into thousands of different solutions, which makes difficult to give how can I say, a consistent and effective communication on the topic. But there is a lot happening, yes.
Yeah, and this is a question that popped into my mind. I mean, you're coming from a different perspective, living in Italy. Is there a country that is inspiring you when it comes to the way they are dealing with the bioeconomy?
Sorry?
Is there a country that is inspiring you when it comes to the way they're dealing with the bioeconomy? Is there some place that's really inspiring you?
Actually, I should say that I try to pick up things from different areas of the world. Something that, well, I was a bit surprised from the presentation by Jeff on Canada, because we always look at Northern America as a place where there is much openness towards technology. And this is something that we suffer in the EU, because besides many different things that are progressing, we always have the feeling that bringing novelties is always a struggle. So yes, but in the end, different value chain have actually probably different references. For example, in Italy, we have a struggling forest sector that could innovate a lot, and we have to look at countries where the forest sector is strong, but with a problem that forest in Italy is not the same of Canada or Finland or Northern Europe anyway. So we have to adapt things. It's very difficult to get really good example that you can bring as they are. You have always to adapt and to tailor to the local situation.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Davide, for your presentation, for asking those questions. We're now going to move into the panel discussion. So to the audience, please continue to put your questions in the chat and tell us your name and a bit about yourself and your location and profession. We have a few questions to start off with, and the first one is for Jeff. Can you tell us more about the opportunities that you see in Canada for developing the bioeconomy? Any success stories of Canadian companies that you'd like to share with us? And that one is for Jeff.
Well, I should maybe do a little bit better job of, I'll get to that question, and also answering the question before about someone, I think Joel said he thought there was a national strategy, and I just wanted to reiterate that this was a strategy that was put together with funding from Agriculture Canada, $200,000 to BIC, Bioindustrial Innovation Canada, but it was a report put together with the input from and by industry, and then it was submitted to Agriculture Canada back in 2019, and there's been no formal response. And so essentially, all that effort was done with all kinds of recommendations, but there's not been a national bioeconomy strategy from the federal government, which is what I'm talking about when I say that we need a national strategy from the government. Now, having said that, and to Davide's comment about being surprised by my comments about Canada, in terms of who inspires me, it's what's going on in the US and the all-of-government approach to the bioeconomy and the national bioeconomy strategies there and their bio-preferred program and so on. Like I said, a catalog with over 16,000 items. But the fact that Canada doesn't have a strategy doesn't mean that companies aren't getting on with doing stuff. And I mean, Kendra is an example of that. I mean, there are Canadian companies who are producing bio-based solvents, and I mean, if you go, just as an example, or textiles, or Kendra wants to do stuff in, with manure. And by the way, Kendra, I have a question for you, which is, you mentioned that you have a plan to do a digester, but what's stopping you? Is there something happening that it hasn't happened yet? Is it just too slow of a regulatory environment, or what?
Yeah, so currently there's no real clear pathway within Alberta. We have a really good regulatory framework in Alberta. However, biodigesters just doesn't really fit in a specific spot. So I think it's been a bit slower than other jurisdictions in Canada. For example, in Ontario, you can have an on-farm biodigester permitted within a 6 to 8 week timeframe, and we would be more around the 1.5 to 2 year mark now. So it is just a slower process that way. However, it's newer to Alberta. I mean, 300 on-farm biodigesters, Ontario. We only have a few here in Alberta. So I think just opportunity to create a good regulatory framework that we can make sure these biodigesters are built in an environmental way, but yet in a very clear pathway on how to do that.
So I'm wondering, Davide, if you can also tell us a little bit about how you would compare the bioeconomy strategy in the United States to the bioeconomy strategy in Europe. Do you feel like you want to talk about that?
Well, I'm not an expert of what is happening in US, but my perception is that the United States was much more focused on a few items, especially what we perceive is a strong policy related to biofuel, much stronger than in Europe. The European one looks much much broader in a way, but also less focused and less directly connected to incentives. That's one of my perceptions. In addition, in the EU is less than federal, so the EU level strategy, except for agriculture, has no direct effect on what member states do. So it's more a direction that needs to be implemented through several levels of strategy. So probably less directly effective on the aims that it tends to.
One thing that
in a way,
Go ahead.
The discussion in Europe at the beginning was a lot driven by the OECD definition related to biotechnology as centers for the bioeconomy concept. And that got diluted over time. And now it's more a general strategy for all sectors using biological resources with much vague targets to achieve.
Go ahead,
That's the
Jeff.
perception.
Well, one of the things that Davide said was that in his presentation was that in the early stages of the European Commission bioeconomy strategy, the focus was more on energy, and then he referred also to the US and the focus on biofuels. And I think that's absolutely correct. And what has happened now, more recently, is, I mean, if you think of a barrel of oil, you know, you get your huge amount of gasoline and diesel fuel and aviation fuel and everything else, and then you've got all these specialty chemicals. And that's the exciting stuff that the US bioeconomy strategy has recognized. Like Davide said, it's way more than energy anymore. It's biochemicals for a host of bioproducts and biomaterials, everything from textiles to personal care products and industrial cleaners and solvents and plastics and all that stuff that we currently get from a barrel of oil could instead come from carbohydrates. So that evolution is taking place in Europe and in the US. And this bold goals for the US bioeconomy and biomanufacturing is very much focused on that opportunity, which is why, to your question of who inspires, I just can't imagine anything so well written and so comprehensive coming out of the government of Canada that came out of the White House. If you look at that executive order back from 2022, it is just so all-encompassing and so articulate in terms of the opportunities there. And I think, you know, given the resource, I mean, 348 million hectares of forest land, that's bigger than every country in Europe. You know, we're 9% of the world's forests in this country, and 60 million hectares of ag land, like I said before. So it's just counterintuitive that we don't have this on our radar, you know, at a federal level.
Thank you, Jeff, for sharing those comments too. I'm going to ask you something, Kendra. This is from Heather Ramshaw. She's the Food Hub Coordinator at the University of Calgary. Firstly, she says, thank you for your presentation, Kendra. Very exciting to see biodigestation being rolled out across your feedlots. You mentioned you've seen an increase in animal welfare, and I'm wondering what your indicators for that would be. Also, I am interested in compost heat transfer, and here it is another great option for cattle operations. Wondering if there is something that could be considered on such a large scale. So 2 questions there. You mentioned you've seen an increase in animal welfare, and I'm wondering what your indicators for that would be. And then the other one after is about compost heat transfer.
Okay, no, awesome. Well, appreciate the question. So what we do within our operation is we're constantly doing research. So we monitor our animals and see how they respond to multiple different things. But one was the rolled compacted concrete. So we had some clay lined pens and we had rolled compacted concrete pens. So we did a research trial with PhD animal scientists. Currently, the company is TELUS Agriculture, and we assessed the animals. So we look at their performance. So oftentimes, if a healthy animal, they eat and they grow, that's a good indicator that they are healthy. So that's one indication to tell us that they were performing just as well on rolled compacted concrete as clay. The other one is during a mud event. We see the animal welfare discomfort just because of the mud when the rolled compacted concrete prevents that mud from happening. So there's a few things that we're constantly doing to monitor our animals and see how they are performing on a health standpoint, but also on just a growth standpoint. And we definitely did that before we deployed a bunch of capital to invest in this concrete. And then your second question is, I'm not familiar with that, I don't think. So we're always looking at different innovative ideas for both our manure, but also, you know, once we have a biodigester at one of our sites, either in the US or here in Canada, to see what we can do with the digestate or other feedstock opportunities to go into the biodigester. So I'm not sure how it fits in, but very open to learn more about it.
So Kendra, this question is for me actually, because I mentioned I use chicken poo or manure in my vegetable garden, and that's my secret. And I buy it at Canadian Tire, and it's in these pellets, or sometimes you just, it's kind of like ground up. When can we buy your digestate at Canadian Tire for my garden? What's the plan?
That would be the ultimate goal, to be honest. But but it's very but we haven't focused a ton of energy on our digestate beyond the farmer, because we're just working with the farmers right now. However, we see that opportunity. One thing that we're processing the manure, right, which we've never done before, and now we have this opportunity because we are incorporating the biodigester, is that we have an ability to actually process that digestate further to grab the nutrients we want for different markets, so that we utilize those nutrients in the best way, both for your garden, for a greenhouse, or for the farmer, right? Rather than overloading certain nutrients to the land, we pull some out and maybe sell them to you instead. So we see that as the next evolution on. I think that's kind of what David and Jeff mentioned, right? Energy is just one piece of this puzzle. Now we have another piece that we could potentially, replace synthetic fertilizer for organic fertilizer simply by processing that digestate a bit further.
I'm sure all the ladies from my garden group will be knocking on your door very soon.
We'll stop by anytime. We'll give you a bucket. No problem.
Okay, I'll hold you to that. So, Davide, this is for you. Can you tell us more about the connection between the bioeconomy and the rural economy? What are you doing to support training on the bioeconomy, please?
Oh, that's a big issue, actually. Well, in the past, there was quite a lot of disconnection between bioeconomy and rural areas. Now, there is a more and more sort of discourse or rhetoric on the fact that the bioeconomy will bring a lot of opportunities to rural areas. And there is a tendency to sell the bioeconomy as something that will make a lot of opportunity for marginal rural areas, which is something that is very much into the agenda in Italy. To what extent this is actually true is something that we are trying to understand, actually. For sure, there are new opportunities, but also many marginal areas are marginal because of difficulties in land productivities or similar things. So it's not straightforward that you bring a new technology using biomass and you create opportunity. But that's one of the forefronts. The other thing is that the bioeconomy is now pushing to have more biomass production, so it's an opportunity to making also money and profits from agriculture, but it also have the issue of connection with not clashing with food security concerns and with agricultural prices, which is the other problem, or with the cost of access to land. So it's a complex mix of things, but I think, of course, the main issue is related to opportunities that should go through the development of new value chain, as the policy correctly does. About training, that's a big issue. Because there is a lot of emphasis of needs of new skills from the bioeconomy for the bioeconomy, but at the same time we already have quite a lot of good skills from people in agriculture, food, biochemistry, engineering, and so on. The thing is that the bioeconomy concept is not well known. So many of these people don't see themselves as players in the bioeconomy. So what we are doing is to try to provide a better connection with industry and complementary skills with horizontal understanding of the bioeconomy in such a way that we have experts in different fields to actually locate themselves in the wider context of the bioeconomy.
Thank you, Davide. So my next question is for Jeff. Why is the bioeconomy not more advanced in Canada? What do you anticipate the primary focus will be as we shape our national strategy for this? And do you see the conversations being driven by economic opportunities, or will the emphasis be on addressing climate change?
Well, that's a pretty loaded question. Lots in that. I think the first part is because we're not bioliterate, and both Kendra and Davide spoke about the need for education, and that people are not familiar with the opportunity in the bioeconomy. So yes, Canadians, both at the government level, industry level, civil society level, need to become more bioliterate. Now, what will the focus be? Was that the other part of the question? I think the
Yes,
focus needs to
it
be.
was, do you think, do you see the conversations being driven by economic opportunities, or where the emphasis be on addressing climate change?
It has to be both. And the interesting thing is that, I mean, if you look at California as an example, they have driven down greenhouse gas emissions from transportation fuels at the same time as they have grown their economy. And they've grown, and it's not just growing the economy, but on a emissions per GDP basis. So it's something that the Trudeau government has been talking about for quite some time, that we can have sustainable economic growth. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier, when we're talking to growers and farmers, they need the bioeconomy offers huge new economic opportunities for rural Canada, for agriculture and forestry, but of course, it all has to be done sustainably. So the focus of a national bioeconomy strategy, one of the benefits of a national strategy would be to articulate that. You know, this is how we're going to accomplish all this economic activity at the same time as we meet our obligations on the environmental front.
And Davide, can you respond to this question as well, and talk a little bit about where you think conversations should be focused when it talks about the economic opportunities in Europe? Do you think it should focus on climate change, or what do you think?
I think a mix of focus with also some pragmatic approach. This issue of bioliteracy is actually very important here as well. People simply don't know the concept or don't know the opportunity. On the other hand, in many sectors, we still claim we have nice solutions, but they are not cost effective, so not profitable for the value chain, and then more expensive for consumers. So I think we should try to be clear where we have options that are actually good options from an economic point of view, that we can sell and we can valorize because they are good for the market, and options where we need public intervention because they are good for climate change, for example, but not directly profitable for the companies potentially producing them. And I think we need one another, because there's no point in trying to convince people if you don't have good solutions, and you cannot simply develop the bioeconomy by providing technology if people don't know about the concept. The one trend now is to bring things on a more emotional level for the bioeconomy, looking at design. For example, there is a Bauhaus program now developing in Europe to make people feeling the concept and the cultural side of the bioeconomy, besides explaining that we solve the waste problem.
You know, one of the things, and this is an old idea, but things would become more economic if we included the externalities associated with the burning of fossil fuels in the cost of the products and materials. So we need to level the playing field in two ways. We need to include environmental externalities for both, by the way, not just for fossil fuels, but for on the bioenergy or bioeconomy side. And then we need to stop subsidizing fossil fuels. I mean, the federal government has been talking for years about getting rid of the subsidies to oil and gas, but never taking any action. And that would also help level the playing field on the, let's make everything economically competitive.
Okay, so I'm going to jump to a question for Kendra from Neil Hawkwood, rancher in Rocky View, Alberta. How do you access your food waste for the biodigester, please?
Yeah, so we're only about 30 minutes, 40 minutes south of Calgary, industrial area where we plan to have the biodigester facility. And Calgary's a large city with a significant amount of organics. So so we're just well positioned that way. We are close to a large hub. Um, and so that's kind of where we're focused on right now is that market.
Question I have for all of you is about bioliteracy. You keep talking about how we really need to support it and develop it. Do you have any suggestions?
Well, I would think that one thing the federal government could do is, and I'm sounding a bit like a broken record here, but if we had a national bio-preferred program similar to the US, and where there were stickers on all of the items that were, certified, and you can't self-certify, obviously, it has to be independently certified as it is done in the US. And then if you can demonstrate that your plastic bottle is minimum 30% biomass based, you get a government sticker that says, this product, this material, this textile, whatever, this skirt or shirt that you're buying is made from biomass or cotton or whatever. So that would then help educate the consumers because they say, oh, look at that. I wonder, and maybe they would be willing to buy that product or they would be interested in finding out more about that product. Why on earth am I buying laundry detergent that's made in the United States? I mean, it's ridiculous,
Okay, so I'm going to ask Kendra one more question. This is the last question before we wrap up. And this is from Colleen. She's a farmer of cattle near Edmonton. She says, thank you very much for the presentation. What is the conversion rate of manure waste to energy, BTU or gigajoule, input, output, please?
Oh, very good question. You put me on the spot. Well, our feedlot paired with the biodigester would produce around 400,000 gigajoules, and that's with manure and organic feedstock going into that biodigester. So, so I don't have the conversion offhand, but that just gives you a feel for. And we have 80,000 tons of manure and 60,000 tons of organics to produce that energy. So hopefully that is helpful.
Well, thank you so much, Kendra, Jeff, and Davide for sharing your knowledge with us today. It was so interesting, and we've learned a lot. To our participants, you will receive a post-event survey and a registration link for the next online panel discussion on March 13th, which is about regenerative agriculture. Please also go to the simpsoncenter.ca website and subscribe to hear more about upcoming events and receive our monthly newsletter for information based on research about Canadian food production. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.